Across the vast, sprawling expanse of the United States, there exists a silent, breathing kingdom that maps out the failures of the American dream. It is not found on any modern GPS, nor is it celebrated in tourism brochures. This is the realm of urban decay, a living, breathing entity that feeds on the silence of the forgotten and the rust of the abandoned. It is more than just peeling paint and shattered glass. It is a personified force of time and progress that works tirelessly to erase human history, one brick at a time. While the rest of the world rushes toward a digital future, these skeletal remains of hospitals, towns, and prisons stand as stubborn monuments to a past that refuses to be completely consumed. They are the scars on the landscape where the heartbeat of society once thundered, but now only echoes with the wind. To find the heart of this decay, one must travel far from the glowing lights of the metropolitan hubs. Our journey begins as the sun dips below the jagged horizon of the misty Appalachian Mountains. Here, the fog doesn't just sit, it rolls like a heavy gray curtain, obscuring the twisted trees and the jagged cliffs. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient pine, carrying a chill that seems to seep directly into the bone. Navigating these winding, neglected roads is like traveling back in time. The asphalt is cracked, surrendered to the persistent roots of the forest, and the signs of civilization grow increasingly sparse. In this hollowed-out wilderness, the silence is heavy, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath tires and the distant, lonely cry of a hawk circling above the vast, dark canopy. Driving through this ethereal landscape is a man known only as the Chronicler. He is an explorer of the soul, a witness to the lost identities of those the world chose to abandon. Where others see a pile of rubble, he sees a life story interrupted. His motivation is a quiet, burning desire to uncover the names and faces of the thousands who once called these crumbling structures home. He understands that every abandoned room was once a stage for a human drama, and he believes that as long as someone remembers, those lives are not truly gone. However, his mission puts him at odds with the relentless march of modern progress. Society wants to move on, to pave over the tragedies and the embarrassments of the past, but the Chronicler knows that the stubborn, dark memories of these sites refuse to be erased. As he approaches the first site, the theme of family hangs heavy in the air. We often think of these abandoned places as cold, industrial voids, but they were once vibrant communities. These buildings housed thousands of individuals who ate, slept, laughed, and wept within these walls. For many, these sites were the only home they ever knew. Whether it was a patient in a state asylum or a miner's child, the connections formed here were as real as any we experience today. Before we continue this journey into the heart of the forgotten, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. It is through your eyes that these stories continue to live on, ensuring that the people who occupied these spaces are never truly erased from our memory. The Chronicler stops his vehicle where an ivy-choked structure looms like a slumbering beast. He steps out into the damp grass, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He makes his way toward a side entrance, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the air is stagnant, smelling of mold and old paper. He wanders through the labyrinthine corridors until he finds himself in what was once a nursery. The room is a graveyard of childhood. Small, rusted iron cribs stand in rows, their mattresses long since rotted away. Faded murals of animals peel from the walls like dead skin. It is here, amidst the decay, that he finds a small, leather-bound book. It is a personal diary, its pages brittle. As he opens the cover, he realizes this isn't just a record of daily life. It is a desperate message, a haunting revelation. The Chronicler slips the fragile diary into his inner pocket, leaving the rotting nursery of the Appalachian Mountains behind. His destination lies north in Massachusetts, where the air turns sharp with the scent of the Atlantic. Emerging from the gray horizon like a jagged crown is the Danvers State Hospital. This is the castle on the hill, a massive Gothic revival structure designed with the sprawling wings of a bat. Its towering spires and red brick masonry were part of the Kirkbride plan, promising that beauty and light could heal a broken mind. The fog here clings to the gargoyles like a damp shroud, whispering of the thousands who entered these doors and never returned. As the Chronicler parks at the base of the overgrown driveway, the building feels more like a tomb than a hospital. The windows are hollow sockets, staring down with a cold, judgmental silence that warns of the secrets kept within its stone skin. Inside, the grandeur of the high ceilings quickly yields to a suffocating sense of dread. This is where Dr. Arthur Parnassus once walked, a man whose name is etched into the darker chapters of medical history. When Parnassus first arrived at Danvers, he was fueled by a genuine, desperate desire to heal. He believed in the power of empathy, trying to understand the most tormented souls. However, the institution was a beast that could not be fed. A facility built for 600 patients was soon swamped by over 2,000. The halls became congested with a cacophony of screams echoing through the ventilation shafts. This pressure began to warp Parnassus's resolve. The healer fractured, his medical duty losing ground to a terrifying curiosity and the cold pressure of administrative efficiency. The internal conflict within Parnassus mirrored the descent of the hospital itself. As the decades passed, the lure of the quick fix became irresistible to a man drowning in chaos. The lobotomy was his siren song, a procedure that promised to silence the voices of the mad with the flick of a wrist and the plunge of a steel pick. Parnassus justified his actions as mercy, convincing himself that a person without a personality was better than a person in pain. This was the ultimate betrayal. The state had entrusted its most vulnerable citizens to his care, only for him to turn them into hollow shells for the sake of science. The whispering halls of Danvers are not just an architectural quirk, they are a sonic graveyard where the muffled voices of the silence still cling to the peeling wallpaper. The patient's frantic struggle for survival clashed daily with a staff that had surrendered to a culture of indifference and cruelty. The chronicler wanders deeper into the labyrinth, his flashlight cutting through the stagnant, heavy dust. He passes the hydrotherapy rooms, where the rusted tubs look like instruments of torture rather than tools of healing. The air is thick with the betrayal felt by the thousands forgotten by the world outside. Massachusetts had built a palace of progress, but inside they allowed a nightmare to flourish. As he reaches the lower levels, the temperature drops significantly. He pulls a set of floor plans from his bag, but near the central boiler room, the math doesn't add up. There is a void in the masonry never registered on any official blueprints. He notes the way the bricks have been haphazardly replaced, as if someone was in a desperate hurry to seal away a terrible mistake. He finds a concealed latch hidden behind a rusted electrical panel. With a heavy metallic groan, a section of the wall swings inward, revealing a staircase descending into a damp, lightless crawl space. The chronicler follows it, heart hammering. At the bottom lies a single, windowless room, its walls lined with lead to dampen sound. In the center of this hidden chamber stands a lone wooden chair. It is bolted to the concrete floor with heavy leather straps still dangling from the armrests. The chair is not empty of history. The seat and the floor beneath it are stained with dark mahogany-colored spatters that have soaked deep into the grain over the decades. This was Parnassus's private theater, where the rules of medicine were suspended for a cure far worse than the disease. The discovery of this blood-stained chair is a grim testament to a secret linking every abandoned site on the chronicler's list, a hidden legacy of pain that is only just beginning to reveal its true horrifying scale. The chronicler leaves behind the oppressive humidity of Massachusetts, haunted by the lead-lined chamber. The journey westward is long, a transition from damp madness to sun-bleached frontier skeletons. He arrives at the edge of the Sierra Nevada, where the air grows thin and the wind carries the scent of sagebrush and ancient dust. Here lies Bodie, California, a place where time stopped, paralyzed by total abandonment. Unlike Appalachia's rotting wood or Danvers' crumbling brick, Bodie exists in a state of arrested decay. The dry, high-altitude air has mummified the buildings, preserving the wallpaper, the whiskey bottles on the bars, and the goods on the general store shelves as if the inhabitants never returned. This was once a town of 10,000 souls, fueled by the feverish promise of the Standard Gold vein. Among those who clawed at the earth was Silas Thorne, a man whose name serves as a warning against the corrosive power of greed. Silas had been a carpenter in a green valley, a man with a wife and a young daughter who looked at him as if he were the sun itself. But the whispers of the gold strike reached his ears like a siren song. He traded the soft earth of his home for the jagged rocks of the mountains, seeking a lifetime of luxury through months of hardships. But the mountains are jealous gods. Silas found gold, yes, but the more he unearthed, the more he feared losing it. The glint of gold reflected in his hollow eyes. He stopped sending letters home. He spent his nights guarding his claim with a loaded shotgun, his eyes growing as hard and cold as the quartz he mined. He chose gold over human connection, becoming a ghost before he died. The environment of Bodhi was a cruel overseer. At over 8,000 feet, the winters were sieges, snow piled to the rooftops, and the wind howled with a ferocity that could drive a man to insanity. In this frozen isolation, the worst of human nature bubbled to the surface. Barroom brawls were the primary form of entertainment, and the local cemetery filled faster than the town could build coffins. Yet, amidst this chaos, there was a single point of light. A child known to history as the Angel of Bodhi. She was a little girl, innocent and bright, whose laughter was the only thing that could silence the coarse shouts of the miners. Her sudden death, some say from a freak accident, others from mountain fever, marked the true end of Bodhi's heart. When they buried her, the town seemed to lose its will to survive. The greed remained, but the hope was gone. The chronicler walks down the deserted main street, his boots crunching on the gravel. He notices the way the curtains flutter in the broken windows, like the ragged breaths of a dying man. This is where the legend of the body curse took root. It is said that the town protects its own ruins, and that anyone who dares to remove even a pebble or a rusted nail from this ground will be haunted by misfortune. It is a form of revenge from the earth itself, a lingering resentment from a place that was stripped of its resources and then discarded. The miners took the gold, and now the land demands that everything else stay exactly where it fell. The silence of the high desert is absolute, a thick blanket of unspoken apologies left by those who fled. Near the old park ranger station, the chronicler pauses. He has heard of the cursed letters, packages sent from afar containing items stolen decades ago. He finds one such letter displayed behind glass. Its ink faded, but its tone desperate. It is a modern-day account from a man who had visited Bodhi 40 years prior and took a glass medicine bottle. In the years that followed, his business collapsed and his health failed. "Please," the letter begs, "put this back where it belongs. I cannot bear the weight of it anymore. I am sorry for my greed." The chronicler looks at the glass bottle returned with the letter. Greed doesn't just take from the earth, it leaves a stain on the soul that time cannot wash away. He feels the weight of the diary in his jacket, a reminder that every ruin has a voice. He looks toward the horizon, where the smoke of a different kind of fire is beginning to rise, signaling his next destination, a place where the earth itself is burning. The dry winds of Bodhi fade as the chronicler crosses the heartland, moving toward the humid, heavy air of the Appalachian coal country. Pennsylvania's landscape is vastly different, lush, rolling hills scarred by centuries of extraction and industry. He finds himself on a highway that simply stops, blocked by massive earth mounds and rusted signs. This is the threshold of Centralia, a town literally being consumed from the inside out. Beneath the cracked pavement, a subterranean coal fire has been burning since 1962. It began as a simple landfill cleanup, but the flames found abandoned mine shafts, igniting a vein of coal that experts say may burn for another 2 centuries. The air reeks of sulfur and a slow-motion catastrophe. Even the soil feels uncomfortably warm beneath his boots, a fever that never breaks. The mayor of Centralia stood at the epicenter of this nightmare for decades. He was a man defined by a choice no leader should ever have to face: the preservation of his people's history versus their literal survival. As carbon monoxide rose in basements, the mayor saw his community fracture before his eyes. It wasn't just a political crisis, it was a profound spiritual one. He looked into the eyes of families who had lived in those valleys for generations. Men whose grandfathers pulled the coal now burning beneath them from the dark earth. To leave was to admit defeat and surrender the only life they knew, but to stay was to risk waking in a house filled with invisible lethal gas. He sat in his office, listening to the ground rumble with the weight of a dying legacy. The conflict tore through the social fabric of Centralia like the fire through the mountain. Brother turned against brother as the town split between the stayers and the leavers. Those who accepted money to relocate were seen as traitors by the ones who stayed, accused of helping the government kill the town's spirit for a paycheck. The danger became visceral in 1981, when a 12-year-old boy was nearly swallowed by a steaming sinkhole in his backyard. A pit leading down down into the fiery depths of the mines. This event shattered the last illusion of safety. The mayor watched as the post office closed and houses were demolished one by one. The slow, agonizing heartbreak of watching a community disappear into toxic smoke was more painful than the fire itself. Each bulldozed home was a memory erased, leaving only the smell of charred wood and sulfur. For the few residents who remained, the fire became more than a geological accident. It was a curse. They spoke in hushed, fearful tones, suggesting the smoke rising from road cracks was a manifestation of the town's accumulated sins. Perhaps it was the greed of mining companies that hollowed the mountain, or the internal bitterness that poisoned the community. They saw the fire as a purgatory on Earth, a cleansing flame that refused to die until the last trace of Centralia was erased from the map. The chronicler feels this weight as he walks the graffiti highway, where heat has warped the asphalt into jagged, heaving waves. The colors of the paint are vibrant, but the ground beneath is dying, exhaling the breath of a furnace. He checks the diary, noting that the entries here grow frantic and smudged by soot. As evening falls, the chronicler launches a drone to see what the ground conceals. The camera glides over barren patches where trees were choked to death by subterranean heat. Smoke drifts in ghostly plumes, catching the orange light of the setting sun. As the drone hovers over a vent near the old cemetery, the chronicler's breath hitches. On the monitor, through the toxic haze, a shape appears. It is a figure, tall and motionless, standing directly in the smoke where no human should breathe. The figure doesn't move or flinch. It simply stares toward the lens with an intensity that pierces the digital feed before the smoke thickens, masking the ground. The chronicler brings the drone back to the safety of his hands, his fingers trembling against the cold plastic controller. The fire isn't just burning coal, it's keeping something awake in the dark, a witness to the town's slow descent into the fiery abyss that once served as its heartbeat. The chronicler shakes the ash of Centralia from his boots as he enters the shadow of a stone giant in Philadelphia. Eastern State Penitentiary rises like a grim cathedral of justice, its crenellated walls standing in stark defiance of the city that grew up around it. This was the world's first true penitentiary, a radical and terrifying experiment in human psychology. Unlike the chaotic dungeons of the past, Eastern State was designed to break the body to save the soul. Here, the silent system reigned supreme. Every prisoner was kept in total, agonizing isolation, forbidden from speaking or even seeing another inmate. The architecture itself was a weapon. Long, vaulted corridors radiated from a central hub like the spokes of a wheel, allowing a single guard at the center to monitor every cell block without ever being seen. Inside one of these stone boxes lived prisoner number 246. He was not a violent man, but a casualty of a corrupt system, framed by a powerful family who needed him silenced to protect their own reputation. For 23 hours a day, he sat alone beneath a single narrow skylight known as the Eye of God. The architects believed that total silence would force a man to look inward, to reflect on his sins, and find redemption through the weight of his own conscience. But for prisoner number 246, the silence did not bring God, it brought an echoing void. He spent decades in a sensory desert where the only sound was the thumping of his own heart and the occasional scrape of a guard's soft-soled shoes. The human mind is a social instrument, and when denied the resonance of another voice, it begins to vibrate with the frequencies of madness. The chronicler runs his hand over the peeling plaster of the cell walls, feeling the history of that desperation. He sees the traces of prisoner number 246's struggle, faint, desperate scratches in the stone. They weren't pleas for food or freedom, but names. Scratched deeply into the mortar were the names of a wife and 3 children who had long since moved on, believing their father to be a criminal. These messages of love, carved with fingernails and bits of metal, were the only things keeping the man tethered to a reality that was slowly eroding. The penitentiary, once envisioned as a place of spiritual rebirth, had transformed into a factory of insanity. As the decades passed, the idealistic goals of the Quaker founders crumbled under the weight of overcrowding and systemic cruelty. The silent system became a torture of the mind. Men who were once sane began to scream at shadows, their voices muffled by the thick masonry. The chronicler moves toward cell block 4, where the atmosphere feels heavier, as if the air itself is saturated with the residue of 1,000 broken spirits. Here, the silence isn't peaceful, it is a pressurized weight that pushes against the eardrums. The messages on the walls grow more frantic here, overlapping in a chaotic collage of lost identities and forgotten lives. The narrative of Eastern State took a turn when its most famous resident, Al Capone, arrived. Unlike the nameless wretches like prisoner number 246, Capone's cell was a palace of velvet, rugs, and a cabinet radio. Even in a place built on the principle of absolute equality before God, wealth found a way to buy comfort. Yet, even the king of the underworld could not escape the darkness that saturated the stone. Guards reported that Capone would scream into the night, begging Jimmy to leave him alone. Some believed Jimmy was the ghost of a victim from the St. Valentine's Day massacre, proving that even a man of power could be haunted by the echoes of his own deeds within these silent walls. Today, the prison is a ruin of rusted iron and crumbling stone, but the silence still screams. Modern night guards tell stories of hearing the sound of a man pleading for mercy coming from the very cell where prisoner number 246 spent his final days. It is a chilling, visceral sound that bypasses the ears and strikes directly at the soul. The chronicler stands in the center of the radial hub, the diary in his hand, feeling heavy with the collective grief of those buried alive deep inside. The chronicler leaves the heavy silence of Philadelphia behind, driving south toward the mist-shrouded hills of Louisville, Kentucky. Here, perched atop a rise like a decaying crown, sits Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Its Tudor Gothic facade, stretching out like the wings of a predatory bird, dominates the landscape. This is a place where time has coagulated into a thick, suffocating dread. In the early 20th century, this massive structure was the front line of a desperate war against the White Plague, the tuberculosis epidemic consuming the nation. The chronicler feels a sudden drop in temperature as he steps onto the grounds, the air tasting of damp earth and old iron. He thinks of Mary Hill, a young nurse who arrived here with dreams of healing, only to find herself a witness to a conveyor belt of mortality. For Mary and the staff, the sanatorium was not just a hospital. It was an isolated city of the doomed. Families would drive their loved ones to the iron gates, leaving them with a wave and a promise to return, a promise both parties knew would likely never be kept. The heartbreak of those final goodbyes is baked into the very bricks. The chronicler can almost see the ghosts of those families. The lingering scent of perfume and tobacco mixed with the medicinal tang of antiseptic. At the heart of Waverly Hills lies its most notorious feature, the Death Tunnel. This 500-foot concrete corridor leads from the hospital down to the bottom of the hill. Originally designed for supplies, its purpose shifted as the death toll began to skyrocket. To prevent patients from seeing the constant stream of hearses, a sight that would strip away their remaining hope, the staff used the tunnel to move bodies in secret. Mary Hill remembered the sound of wooden carts rattling against the cold concrete in the dead of night. She saw the sheets draped over silent forms, the feet of the young and old alike sticking out. This tunnel became a dark vein for the sanatorium. The sheer scale of the tragedy is difficult to fathom. Over 63,000 souls are estimated to have perished within these walls. This concentration of suffering has created a thin spot in the fabric of reality, where the veil between worlds has worn to a translucent thread. The chronicler ascends to the 5th floor, his footsteps echoing through the hollowed-out wards. He stops at room 502, a place that pulses with concentrated sorrow. It was here that a young nurse, perhaps a colleague of Mary's, took her own life. Plagued by a scandalous pregnancy and absolute isolation, she was found hanging. Later, another nurse would jump from the roof in despair. These deaths were caused by a society offering no mercy. As the chronicler explores, he consults the diary, finding entries that hint at a darker truth buried beneath official records. The treatments for tuberculosis were often more lethal than the bacteria itself. In a desperate bid to save lives, doctors performed barbaric surgeries. They would remove ribs to allow lungs to expand or insert balloons into the chest cavity, often leading to massive infections or hemorrhaging. These were not cures. They were experiments conducted on a captive population of the dying. The White Plague was a tragedy, but the medical hubris that followed it was a horror of a different kind. The sanatorium was a factory where the human body was treated as a machine to be dismantled. The sun sets, casting skeletal shadows across the peeling walls. The chronicler stands where patients once sat, hoping sunlight would burn the sickness from their blood. He realizes the true horror of Waverly Hills wasn't just the ghosts, but the historical reality of thousands forgotten by the world, discarded in a building designed to hide their suffering. The secret of the lethal treatments remained hidden for decades, a silent pact between the state and the medical establishment. As he turns to leave, the chronicler hears a faint, rhythmic rattling from the direction of the death tunnel, the sound of a cart that should have stopped moving a century ago. He pauses, feeling the weight of the diary against his chest. Knowing his exhaustive search for answers is drawing to its ultimate end, with only one final destination left now. The chronicler pulls away from the looming silhouette of Waverly Hills, driving a road that feels like a bridge between the living and the dead. The journey through the decaying arteries of America is drawing to a close, yet the ghosts of the past travel with him. He has walked the lobotomy-scarred halls of Danvers, where Dr. Arthur Parnassus traded his soul for a surgical knife. He has tasted the dry dust of Body, where Silas Thorne's greed outlived his love, and where the angel of Body keeps a silent vigil. He has breathed the sulphurous air of Centralia, where the local mayor's choices turn neighbor against neighbor. He has felt the crushing weight of Eastern State's silence, where prisoner 246 lived in shadows, and heard the rattling death carts in the Kentucky mist. He remembers the smell of damp wallpaper and the hollow sound of his own footsteps echoing against the skeletal remains. As the car winds into the misty Appalachian Mountains, the chronicler pulls over. The air is crisp, carrying none of the antiseptic stench of the sanatorium. He reaches for the diary, that leather-bound witness he discovered in the rotting nursery at the start of this odyssey. For weeks he has read of suffering, but one final page now yields to his touch. The ink is faded, a ghostly gray against the yellowed parchment, yet the words carry a weight that transcends the decades. It is not an entry of despair. Instead, it is a message from an anonymous hand, perhaps a mother from that nursery, or a patient who saw the sunrise one last time. It speaks of the persistence of the heart, claiming that even when walls crumble and names are forgotten, love remains as a foundation. This discovery is the final piece of the puzzle, a quiet revelation. This is the final resolution. These abandoned places are not merely creepy destinations, they are the scars of a nation, evidence of the immense, beautiful struggle to exist. The chronicler realizes that the darkness was not the final word. In the rusted bars of the penitentiary, he sees the human need for connection. In the toxic smoke of Centralia, he sees the fierce loyalty to home. In the tragic history of Waverly Hills, he sees the compassion of nurses like Mary Hill, who refused to look away from the dying. The common thread isn't failure, it is endurance. The human spirit, much like the ivy that now strangles the brickwork of Danvers, is relentless. It grows through the cracks of disaster, demanding to be seen even when society has turned its back. By uncovering these lost identities, the chronicler has engaged in an act of restoration. To remember the victims of Dr. Parnassus is to demand a more ethical future. To acknowledge the isolation of the silent system is to value the voices of the marginalized today. There is a haunting beauty in these ruins, a reminder that every empire is temporary, and every tragedy eventually yields to the final reclamation of the earth. Nature does not judge the sins of the past, it simply weaves them into the landscape, turning medical horror into forest and greed into a museum of stillness. He realizes that acknowledging these histories prevents us from repeating the same mistakes. The ruins are mirrors reflecting our capacity for both cruelty and survival. The sun begins its descent, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. Below, the skeleton of a collapsed farmhouse catches the light, its roof caved in like a rib cage. It is a scene of profound peace, symbolizing the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The chronicler closes the diary, feeling the weight of the stories he has carried. He knows his work is finished, yet a final question remains. As he looks toward the shimmering lights of a distant city, he wonders which of our modern metropolises will be the next abandoned place a century from now. Which of our lives will be the secrets that future explorers whisper about in the dark? The wind carries the scent of pine and old memories as he pulls back onto the long road. He starts his engine, leaving the ruins to the silence they have forever earned.